The California sun beat down on the tarmac with that particular intensity that made mirages shimmer in the distance. Corporal Kira Ashford felt the heat through her boots as she stepped off the transport vehicle, her fingers wrapped around the handle of a long black rifle case. The weight was familiar, comfortable, like shaking hands with an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Across the compound, three men stood near the armory entrance, their conversation dying mid-sentence as they noticed her approach. The tallest one, broad-shouldered with close-cropped hair going silver at the temples, crossed his arms slowly. Staff Sergeant Jackson Brennan had been with this SEAL unit for 8 years, had seen hundreds of sailors come and go, but this was different. This was politics making decisions that should belong to operators. "She can't weigh more than 130, Brennan muttered to the man beside him, just loud enough to carry on the ocean breeze. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Kane, weathered face suggesting he'd seen more combat than most men twice his age, said nothing, just watched, calculated. After 15 years in the teams, he'd learned that first impressions were often wrong, but rarely by much. Kira kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral in the way she'd learned to keep it over the years. The rifle case balanced perfectly in her grip, her stride even and unhurried across the hot pavement. She'd heard words like these before, at basic training, at sniper school, at her last assignment. The specific phrases changed, but the sentiment remained constant, predictable as the sunrise. She'd learned to catalog doubt and dismissal the way other people collected stamps, filing it away in the part of her mind that no longer had space for anger. The administration building stood ahead, its doors propped open to let the Pacific breeze flow through. Kira shifted the rifle case to her other hand and pulled her orders from her cargo pocket, the paper crisp and official against her calloused fingertips. Inside her chest, her heart beat steady and slow, the same rhythm she'd trained herself to maintain since childhood. Since her father first put a rifle in her small hands and taught her that patience was the deadliest weapon of all. Commander Nathan Sterling sat behind his desk, reviewing personnel files when the knock came. Sharp, professional, exactly 3 raps. "Enter," he called. The woman from the morning arrivals list stepped through the doorway. She was compact, maybe 5'5", with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Her uniform was crisp despite the long transport, her posture perfect without being rigid. The rifle case rested against her leg with a kind of casual familiarity that suggested long acquaintance. "Corporal Ashford," Sterling said, standing and extending his hand across the desk. "Welcome to the unit." "Thank you, sir." Her grip was firm but not aggressive, her eyes meeting his directly without challenge or submission. Professional, controlled. Sterling gestured to the chair across from him and settled back into his own. He'd reviewed her file 3 times already, still trying to reconcile what he was reading with what he was seeing. "I've reviewed your record," he said, keeping his tone neutral. "Impressive marksmanship scores. Your instructors had exceptional things to say. Top of your class in every qualification." Kira nodded once. "I do my best, sir. You'll be bunking in Building 6. Sterling slid a folder across the desk. "Training schedule, team roster, operational protocols. We run a tight unit here, Corporal. Everyone pulls their weight. Everyone maintains standards. No exceptions." "Understood, sir." Sterling studied her for a moment. There was something in her stillness that suggested depths he couldn't quite measure. Most new arrivals showed some nervousness, some eagerness to impress. This woman showed nothing but quiet competence. "I won't pretend you won't face challenges here," he said finally. "This is a close team. They've been together a long time. They'll test you as they test everyone new. Show them what you can do and you'll earn your place." "Yes, sir," Kira replied. Something in her voice, some quiet certainty, made Sterling look at her more carefully. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly what challenges meant in this context, and she'd already decided how she would respond. "Dismissed," he said. "Report to the range at 0600 tomorrow. Staff Sergeant Brennan will be running qualifications. Kira stood, took her folder, and lifted her rifle case. As she turned to leave, Sterling called after her. "Corporal." She paused at the doorway, turning slightly. "Good luck." She didn't smile, but her eyes acknowledged the sentiment before she stepped back into the sunlight. After she left, Sterling pulled up the classified portion of her file on his computer. The section that wouldn't be shared with the team, wouldn't be part of any casual conversation. His eyes moved over the text he'd already memorized. Father, Master Sergeant Donovan Ashford, United States Army Rangers, Medal of Honor recipient, posthumous, killed in action, Afghanistan, 2007. Subject trained by father from age 4 to 6, demonstrating exceptional aptitude. Following father's death, subject pursued military career with stated objective of honoring his legacy. Sterling leaned back in his chair, looking out his window at the compound where Kira Ashford was making her way to Building 6. 25 years old. She would have been 6 when her father died. Everything she knew, everything she'd become, had been built on 6 years of training from a man who never came home. He wondered if Brennan and the team knew what they were really testing. The walk to Building 6 took Kira past the team common area, where Brennan and his companions had moved to a bench in the shade. She felt their eyes tracking her, measuring, judging. The weight of their assessment pressed against her shoulders, but she'd learned long ago not to let it show. "That's our new sniper," Brennan said, loud enough for her to hear. "Going to be real interesting to see how this works out." Beside him, Petty Officer Gavin Cross grinned and shook his head. They're really doing this, actually putting her on the team. Kira kept walking, her stride even and unhurried. The rifle case balanced perfectly in her grip. In her mind, she heard her father's voice from nearly 20 years ago, patient and steady in the way that had made her feel safe, even when she was too young to understand why. "Let them talk, Princess," he'd said. "Words are just air. What matters is what you do when the moment comes. What matters is the shot." She'd been 5 years old, barely able to hold the little .22 rifle he'd bought for her. The memory was crystal clear. The Texas hills behind their house, the smell of gun oil in summer grass, her father's huge hands guiding her small ones into proper position. He'd been so patient, never frustrated when she missed, always encouraging when she hit. "Your hands are small now," he'd told her, "but they'll grow. And the muscle memory we're building, that'll stay forever. By the time you're grown, this'll be as natural as breathing." Kira reached Building 6 and pushed through the door into the cool interior. The barracks were standard military issue. Rows of bunks, lockers, a common area with worn furniture. Only a few of the bunks showed signs of occupancy. She found her assigned space, set down her rifle case, and began the familiar ritual of unpacking. Everything had its place. Uniforms hung precisely, gear stowed according to regulation. Personal items minimal. She'd learned to travel light, to keep her life contained in spaces that could be packed up and moved in under an hour. The only exception was a small photograph she placed on the shelf inside her locker. Her father, in his Ranger uniform, young and proud, a rifle slung over his shoulder. She was 3 years old in the picture, perched on his shoulders, both of them grinning at the camera. Before he deployed the first time, before she was old enough to understand what deployment meant. She touched the glass gently, remembering his lessons about patience, about letting skills speak louder than words. Time will tell, she thought. Time and opportunity. For now, she would do her job, maintain her standards, and wait for the moment when her true capabilities would matter more than anyone's preconceptions. The morning air carried the salt smell of the ocean as Kira made her way to the range, her boots crunching on gravel in the pre-dawn darkness. She'd been awake since 0400, had already run 5 miles along the perimeter fence, her breathing controlled and even throughout. Old habits died hard, and her father's voice still echoed in her mind across the years. The body must be ready before the mind can focus, he'd told her countless times. She'd been too young to appreciate the wisdom then. Now, at 25, She understood that every lesson he'd given her had been designed to build a foundation that would last a lifetime. The range sprawled across the eastern section of the base, targets set at varying distances from 50 to 1,000 meters. Brennan was already there, clipboard in hand, talking with Chief Kane. They both turned as Kira approached, and she saw the quick assessment in their eyes, looking for weakness, for hesitation, for any sign that she didn't belong. "Corporal Ashford," Brennan said, his tone flat. "You're early." "Yes, Staff Sergeant." Kira set her rifle case down on the shooting bench with practiced care. Kane nodded at her, his expression neutral and observant. "Morning, Corporal." Other team members began arriving as the sun broke the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Petty Officer Gavin Cross showed up with Lance Corporal Reed Hoffman, both of them laughing about something until they noticed Kira. Their conversation dropped to murmurs, and Kira caught the word diversity before they moved to the opposite end of the firing line. "All right, listen up," Brennan called out once the team had assembled. "Standard qualifications today: 50 meters prone, 100 kneeling, 200 standing, 500 prone. 5 rounds each position." Corporal Ashford goes first. Kira heard the unspoken challenge in his voice, the way he emphasized her name. She moved to the firing line without comment, opened her case, and began assembling her rifle with practiced efficiency. The weapon came together in her hands like pieces of a puzzle she'd solved 1,000 times before. Each movement was deliberate, economical, the result of countless repetitions that had burned the sequence into muscle memory. "Nice rifle," Kane commented from behind her. "Custom build?" "Yes, Chief," Kira said, not looking up from her work. "Had it configured after sniper school." The rifle was beautiful in its functionality. A Remington 700 action, custom barrel, adjustable stock fitted precisely to her dimensions. But more than that, it was familiar. The weight distribution, the trigger pull, the way it settled against her shoulder, all of it designed to be an extension of her body, her intent. Brennan watched her movements with a practiced eye, searching for hesitation or uncertainty. She loaded her magazine with smooth precision, each round seated perfectly, her fingers moving with the kind of confidence that came from endless repetition. No wasted motion, no second guessing. "Range is hot," Brennan announced. "Corporal, you may commence firing when ready." Kira dropped into prone position, her body finding the ground like water finding its level. She pressed her cheek to the stock, her breathing slowing, and fired 5 rounds in quick succession. The familiar rhythm of breath, pause, squeeze, breath, pause, squeeze. The rifle's recoil was absorbed and controlled, each shot a conversation between her and the target. Through the spotting scope, Kane saw the targets at 50 meters, showing tight groupings, all center mass. He said nothing, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Kneeling position," Brennan called. Kira transitioned smoothly, her movements economical and controlled. 5 more rounds, 5 more impacts clustered in the kill zone. Across the range, Hoffman whispered something to Cross, and both men smirked. They'd seen good shooting before. This was just someone trying hard to make a first impression. "Standing, 200 meters, Brennan said, and there was anticipation in his voice now. This was where many shooters struggled, fatigue setting in, the longer distance demanding more precision, the standing position offering no stability beyond what the body could provide. Brennan had seen plenty of decent shooters fall apart at this stage. Kira stood, adjusted her stance, and took her time with each shot. The targets rang out with each impact, the sound carrying clearly across the range. Through the spotting scope, Kane could see the grouping remain tight, professional, better than professional. 500 meters, prone, Brennan called. There was something different in his tone now, a slight edge. Kira returned to the ground, her body settling into position with a kind of stillness that seemed almost unnatural. She made a small adjustment to her scope, calculated for wind and distance, and fired. The first round kicked up a small puff of dust behind the target. She adjusted, fired again. Center mass. 3 more rounds followed, each one finding its mark. Brennan walked to check the targets himself, Kane following. When they returned, Brennan's face was carefully neutral, professionally controlled. "Adequate," he said. "You meet minimum standards." Kane said nothing, but his eyes lingered on Kira for a moment longer than necessary. He'd seen thousands of qualification shoots in his career, had spotted for some of the best snipers in the Navy. What he just witnessed was far from merely adequate. It was controlled, efficient, and showed a level of comfort with a weapon that suggested extensive experience. The kind of experience that took years to develop, not months. The rest of the team took their turns. Brennan shot well, his groupings tight and consistent, the performance of a man who'd spent years maintaining his edge. Cross was confident but rushed his shots slightly, letting impatience affect his precision. Hoffman showed promise but lacked the patience required for longer distances, his groupings opening up as the range increased. Kira watched from the side, noting their techniques, their breathing patterns, the small tells that revealed their skill levels. Not judging, just observing, calculating, understanding the team she'd been assigned to. After qualifications ended, the team gathered near the armory to clean weapons. Kira worked alone at the far bench, breaking down her rifle with meticulous care. Each component was examined, cleaned, and reassembled with the kind of attention that spoke to deep respect for the equipment. The rifle wasn't just a tool to her, it was a partner, a responsibility, a legacy. "So," Cross said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "how exactly does someone become a SEAL sniper these days? Is there like a special program now or something?" Hoffman laughed, and Brennan didn't stop them. The mockery hung in the air like smoke. Kira continued her work, her hands steady as she ran a cleaning rod through the barrel. The familiar smell of solvent and gun oil was comforting, grounding. She'd cleaned this rifle hundreds of times, in barracks and field positions, in sunshine and rain. The ritual never changed. Chief Kane, cleaning his own weapon at the adjacent bench, glanced over at her, then back at his work. He'd been in the teams long enough to recognize when someone was being tested, and long enough to know that the quiet ones often had the most to prove. As the morning wore into afternoon, Kira completed her tasks and returned to her quarters. Inside her locker, tucked behind her uniforms, was the photograph in its simple frame. Her father in his Army Ranger uniform, young and proud, a rifle slung over her shoulder. 3-year-old Kira on his shoulders, both of them grinning. She touched the glass gently, remembering his lessons about patience, about letting skills speak louder than words. Time will tell, she thought. Time and opportunity. For now, she would do her job, maintain her standards, and wait for the moment when her true capabilities would matter more than anyone's preconceptions. The weeks settled into a rhythm that felt more like attrition than integration. Kira arrived first to every training session, stayed last to complete her tasks, and spoke only when spoken to. The team's skepticism had hardened into something more deliberate, more pointed. They weren't just doubting her capabilities anymore, they were actively testing her resolve. Thursday morning brought physical training, and Brennan seemed particularly interested in testing Kira's limits. The obstacle course stretched across 2 acres of unforgiving terrain, walls to scale, rope climbs, tire runs, and a final sprint that left most sailors gasping. "All right," Brennan called out as the team assembled at the starting line. "Standard course run. Corporal Ashford, you'll go first. Set the pace for everyone else." Cross grinned at Hoffman. "This should be good," he muttered. Kira stepped to the line, her expression unchanged. She'd run courses like this 100 times, knew her capabilities down to the second. The question wasn't whether she could complete it. The question was whether Brennan would accept any performance as adequate. Brennan raised his hand and dropped it. "Go." She exploded forward, her compact frame covering ground with efficient strides. The first wall came up fast, 8 feet of vertical wood, and she hit it with speed, her momentum carrying her up and over. No hesitation, no wasted energy. The rope climb was next, and her arms pulled her body upward with steady power, hand over hand, technique over brute strength. Brennan watched through narrowed eyes as she navigated the course, each obstacle cleared with confidence that was hard to dismiss. She wasn't the fastest. Cross and Hoffman both had longer strides, more raw power, but she was smooth, controlled, never panicking or rushing. Economy of motion that suggested deep familiarity with physical challenge. When she crossed the finish line, her time was solidly in the acceptable range. Not exceptional, but far from failing. She bent at the waist, catching her breath, her face flushed but composed. "Not bad," Brennan said when she returned to the group, "for someone your size." The comment hung in the air, loaded with implication. Kira simply nodded, her breathing controlled. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," she said evenly. The rest of the team ran the course. Hoffman struggled on the rope climb, his technique sloppy, burning energy. Cross was fast but reckless, nearly losing his footing on the tire run. Brennan ran last, his time the best of the group, and he made sure everyone knew it. That afternoon brought range time again, but this session was different. Gunnery Sergeant Rachel Torres had arrived from division headquarters to observe training protocols. She was a compact woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for seeing through pretense. Her clipboard was already active, documenting everything she saw. "Brennan," Torres said as she approached the firing line, "I want to see moving target drills, full team rotation." Moving targets were more challenging, requiring shooters to lead their aim, calculate speed and trajectory in real time. The difference between hitting a stationary bullseye and a lateral moving silhouette was the difference between science and art. Brennan set up the mechanical systems, targets sliding along rails at varying speeds and distances. "Standard protocol," Torres said. 200 meters, lateral movement, 5 shots. Best grouping wins. The team took turns. Cross hit 3 out of 5, his shots lagging slightly behind the target's movement. Hoffman managed 2, his calculations off. Brennan landed 4, his shots well-placed but not exceptional. Kane, when his turn came, hit 4 as well, his decades of experience evident in his steady performance. "Corporal Ashford," Torres called, "you're up." Kira approached the line, loaded her magazine, and settled into position. The target began its lateral slide, moving left to right at a moderate pace. She tracked it with her scope, her breathing slowing, mind calculating lead distance automatically. The mathematics happened beneath conscious thought now, the result of countless hours of practice. She fired. The first shot hit center mass. The second followed almost immediately, then the third, fourth, and fifth, each one finding the mark with precision that made Torres lean forward slightly, her professional interest engaged. Brennan checked the target through his spotting scope, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. 5 for 5, he announced, his voice carefully neutral. "Good shooting, Corporal," Torres said, making a note on her clipboard. "Very good shooting. She got lucky," Cross said quietly to Hoffman, "but not quietly enough." Torres turned her sharp gaze on him. "Something to add, Petty Officer?" "No, Gunnery Sergeant," Cross replied quickly, his face reddening. That evening in the team common area, the mockery took on a new edge. Brennan sat with Cross and Hoffman, their conversation loud enough to carry across the room where Kira sat alone, reading a manual on advanced ballistics. The isolation was deliberate now, a statement being made. "I'm just saying," Cross said, "there's got to be some kind of explanation. Nobody shoots like that without special considerations somewhere along the line." "You mean like easier qualifications?" Hoffman suggested. Brennan said nothing, but he didn't correct them either. His silence was permission, and they took it gladly. Chief Kane entered the common area, grabbed coffee, and noticed Kira sitting alone. He'd been in the teams long enough to recognize talent when he saw it, and also long enough to recognize when politics were interfering with merit. He considered saying something, then decided against it. She'd have to prove herself on her own terms, he thought. That was how the teams worked. That was how they'd always worked. Kira turned a page in her manual, her expression unchanged. Inside, she felt the familiar weight of isolation. It was nothing new, nothing she hadn't experienced before. Her father had warned her about this, had told her that being exceptional meant being alone, until the moment came to demonstrate why exceptional mattered. She thought about the moving target drill, how natural it had felt. The calculations had happened almost automatically in her mind. Distance, speed, wind, the slight elevation difference. All of it processed in the fraction of a second before each shot. It was second nature now. Had been since she was 12 years old, and her father had set up her first moving target in the hills behind their house. The memory came unbidden, sharp and clear. She'd been 12, awkward and self-conscious, but her father had never treated her like she was fragile. He'd treated her like a student, like someone capable of excellence if she was willing to work for it. "You don't shoot to impress, princess," he'd told her. "You shoot because when it matters, when lives depend on it, there's no room for anything less than perfect." She'd made that first moving target shot on her third try. He'd smiled, proud but not surprised, and made her do it again, and again, and again, until it wasn't luck, until it was skill, until it was inevitable. Kira closed her manual and stood, walking past the group of men without acknowledging them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and she would meet them the same way she'd met everything else, with patience, precision, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly what she was capable of, even if no one else did yet. The operations briefing room filled with the quiet shuffling of bodies finding seats, the scrape of chairs against tile, the rustle of notepads being opened. Kira entered last, taking a seat in the back corner as Commander Sterling stood at the front, beside a projection screen showing satellite imagery of a coastal region. "All right, settle in," Sterling said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. "We've got a training operation scheduled for next month. Full scenario, coordinated with Air Wing and Maritime. This is the real deal, everything but live targets." The team leaned forward, interest evident on every face. These large-scale exercises were where reputations were built, where operators proved their worth in conditions that mimicked actual combat as closely as peacetime allowed. "Brennan, you'll be running tactical command," Sterling continued. "I need your team selections by end of week. Sniper positions, assault elements, support roles. Full brief next Monday." Brennan nodded, already making notes on his pad. His mind was calculating, building the team structure that would give him the best chance of success. Experience mattered in exercises like this. Cohesion mattered. Trust mattered. Kira watched from the back, waiting for her assignment, for the indication of where she'd fit into the operation. But as Sterling continued detailing the exercise parameters, her name never came up. Position after position was outlined, and she remained unmentioned, invisible. After the briefing ended, Kira approached Sterling's desk as the room emptied. She waited until they were alone, maintaining her professional demeanor. "Sir," she said quietly, "where do you need me for the exercise?" Sterling looked up from his papers, and something flickered across his face. Regret, maybe, or just pragmatism doing its cold calculations. "Corporal," he said slowly, "Brennan's building his team based on established cohesion. You'll remain on base during the exercise. Continue individual training protocols." The words landed like a physical blow, though Kira's expression never changed. She stood perfectly still, processing the information with the same control she applied to everything else. "Understood, sir," she said. "Don't take it personally," Sterling added, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "There'll be other opportunities." Kira nodded once, turned, and left the briefing room. Behind her, she heard laughter from the team common area, celebration already beginning for an operation still weeks away. The sound followed her across the compound as she walked, the afternoon sun beating down on her shoulders. She kept walking, her stride even and controlled, until she reached the range. The base had grown quiet, most personnel already gone for the day. She set up targets at 600 meters, longer than standard training distances, and began working through a series she designed herself. Each shot required calculation, adjustment for the changing light, the evening breeze picking up from the ocean. She fired, observed, made microscopic changes to her scope, and fired again. The rhythm was meditative, the mathematics of trajectory and wind drift occupying the part of her mind that might otherwise dwell on exclusion and dismissal. Petty Officer Brett Calloway was heading to the mess hall when he noticed the distant crack of rifle fire. Curious, he detoured toward the range and found Kira in prone position, working through her drill with focused intensity. He watched from a distance, observing the way she adjusted her position between shots, the deliberate pause she took before each trigger pull. The targets at 600 meters showed tight groupings that would have impressed most shooters. Calloway had been in the teams for 5 years, had worked with snipers who'd built careers on less consistent performance. He said nothing, just watched for a few more minutes before continuing to the mess hall. But something had shifted in his assessment. This wasn't someone trying to prove a point. This was someone who already knew her worth and was simply maintaining her edge. Inside the team planning room, Brennan had spread maps across a long table, marking positions and movement patterns. Kane stood beside him, offering suggestions based on terrain analysis. Cross and Hoffman were assigned to assault positions, their excitement barely contained. "What about Ashford?" Kane asked, his tone neutral but pointed. Brennan didn't look up from his maps. "She's not ready for this level of operation," he said. "Better she gets more time to adjust to the team." Kane considered pushing back, considered pointing out that her scores were objectively superior to half the men Brennan had already assigned. But he'd seen this pattern before, the way new members were sometimes frozen out until they found a way to force recognition. It wasn't always fair, but it was how tight teams protected their cohesion. At least that's what Kane told himself as he returned to marking the maps. Commander Sterling sat in his office later that night, Kira's personnel file open on his computer screen. The records told a story that didn't match the team's assessment of her. Expert marksmanship ratings across the board. Instructor comments uniformly positive. Completion of advanced courses with distinguished marks. He clicked to the classified section, reading details he'd memorized but kept returning to. Father, Master Sergeant Donovan Ashford, United States Army Rangers. Medal of Honor recipient, posthumous. Operation Enduring Freedom, 2007. Subject trained by father from age 4 to 6, demonstrating exceptional aptitude in marksmanship and tactical thinking. Following father's death, subject pursued military career with stated objective of honoring his legacy and completing training he initiated. Sterling leaned back in his chair, looking out his window toward the darkened range. A single light marked where someone was still working, and he suspected he knew who. He thought about intervening, about forcing Brennan to include her in the operation. But leadership sometimes meant letting teams work through their own dynamics. Or at least, that's what he wanted to believe. Kira fired her final round of the evening, the target ringing out in the growing darkness. She stood slowly, her body stiff from holding position for so long, and began breaking down her rifle with the same meticulous care she showed every piece of equipment. Around her, the base had settled into its nighttime rhythm. Distant voices, the sound of vehicles, the ever-present whisper of the ocean. But inside her mind, calculations continued. Distance, wind, elevation, all the variables that turn shooting from skill into art form. Her father had taught her that the rifle was just a tool, that the real weapon was the mind behind it. Patience, he'd said, precision, and the absolute certainty that when the moment comes, you'll be ready. She packed her equipment, secured her rifle case, and walked back toward her quarters under a sky full of stars. Alone, but not lonely. Excluded, but not defeated. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard his voice one more time, patient and steady across the years. Time will tell, princess. Time and opportunity. They'll see what you can do when it matters. And when they do, there won't be any more questions. She touched the rifle case gently, feeling the worn handle under her fingers, and kept walking into the night. 3 weeks passed in a blur of routine and isolation. Kira maintained her training regimen while the team prepared for their exercise, their excitement building with each passing day. She ran her miles, cleaned her weapons, and studied advanced ballistics texts that most shooters never bothered to read. The exclusion had become normalized, expected, just another variable to account for in the daily calculations of military life. Then came the morning that changed everything. Commander Sterling called an emergency all-hands meeting, his expression grave as the team assembled in the briefing room. Even Kira was summoned, standing at the back while Brennan and his selected operators filled the front rows. The air crackled with tension, the kind that preceded significant announcements. Change of plans, Sterling announced without preamble. Division has modified the exercise parameters. They want to test our capabilities under more challenging conditions. We're adding a long-range precision element. Brennan straightened in his chair, his tactical mind already racing. Sir, we've already finalized the team composition. I'm aware, Sterling said, and there was an edge to his voice that made everyone pay closer attention. But this new element requires specialized skills. We need someone who can make shots at extreme distances in less than ideal conditions. This isn't standard sniper work, Brennan. This is something else. The room fell quiet. Kane glanced at Brennan, then back at Sterling, reading the subtext in the commander's tone. What kind of distances are we talking about, sir? Kane asked. Sterling pulled up a new slide showing terrain maps and elevation charts. Targets at 800 to 1200 meters, he said. Variable wind conditions, moving observations, time constraints. Division wants to see if we can perform surgical strikes at extended range while coordinating with assault elements. Brennan's jaw tightened. My shooters can handle it, sir. Can they? Sterling asked, and the question hung in the air like a challenge. The scoring metrics on this have changed. This isn't just about completing the exercise. This is about demonstrating capabilities that could determine future mission assignments and funding. The weight of that statement settled over the room. Future missions meant real operations, and real operations meant the difference between a unit that deployed and one that trained endlessly without purpose. Career trajectories lived or died on performance in exercises like this. Torres sent me updated performance analytics, Sterling continued, pulling up another slide. The screen filled with data, qualification scores from the past month, moving target accuracy, long-range precision, environmental adaptation. Kira's name sat at the top of every category, her scores significantly higher than the rest of the team. The numbers were undeniable, stark in their clarity. Brennan's knuckles whitened on his clipboard as the numbers settled in. Cross shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Hoffman looked down at his boots, suddenly finding the floor fascinating. Corporal Ashford, Sterling said, and Kira straightened instinctively. You're now primary sniper for the exercise. Brennan, adjust your team composition accordingly. Sir, Brennan began, but Sterling cut him off with a raised hand. This isn't a discussion, Staff Sergeant. We have 3 weeks to prepare, and I need your best people in the right positions. Is that understood? Yes, sir, Brennan said through clenched teeth. The meeting adjourned and the team filed out in uncomfortable silence. Kira remained behind as Sterling gathered his materials, waiting for whatever came next. Corporal, Sterling said without looking up, you'll meet with Gunnery Sergeant Torres tomorrow morning. She'll brief you on the specific requirements and expectations. Yes, sir, Kira replied. Sterling finally looked at her, and there was something in his expression she couldn't quite read. This is your opportunity, he said. Don't waste it. I won't, sir, Kira said, and the quiet certainty in her voice made Sterling believe her. The afternoon sun was slanting through the armory windows when Kira arrived to conduct her equipment check. The space smelled of gun oil and metal, familiar and comforting. She was methodically inspecting her scope mounts when footsteps approached. Brett Calloway leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed but posture relaxed. He'd been watching her from a distance for weeks now, had seen things the others either missed or chose to ignore. "Big change," he said. "You're in the exercise now." Kira glanced up briefly, then returned to her work. "Yes, Brennan's not happy about it," Calloway observed. "I gathered that," Kira said, her hands continuing their precise movements over the equipment. Calloway watched her for a moment, noting the way her fingers moved with practiced familiarity over every surface, checking tolerances, testing connections. "Look," he said, "I've been doing this for a while. I've seen a lot of shooters come through. You're different." Kira paused, finally looking up at him. "Different how?" "You don't shoot like someone who's trying to prove something," Calloway said. "You shoot like someone who already knows, like it's just part of who you are." Kira considered this, then returned to her equipment check. "My father was a sniper," she said quietly. "Army Rangers. He taught me before I could ride a bike." Calloway nodded slowly. "That explains some things," he said. "What happened to him?" "KIA, Afghanistan," Kira said. "I was 6. "I'm sorry," Calloway said and meant it. Kira closed her equipment case and stood. "He taught me that being good wasn't enough," she said. "That you had to be so good that when the moment came, there was no question, no doubt, just the shot." Calloway nodded. "Well, you've got your moment coming. 3 weeks." "I know," Kira replied. That evening, Brennan gathered his team in the common area. Everyone except Kira. His frustration was evident in every line of his body, in the way he paced while the others sat and watched. "This is politics," he said plainly. "Sterling is trying to make a statement." Kane, sitting in the corner, said nothing. He'd reviewed the same analytics Sterling had shown, had seen the numbers that couldn't be argued with. Kira's performance was objectively superior, but Brennan wasn't ready to accept that reality, wasn't ready to admit that his assessment had been wrong from the beginning. "We train together," Brennan continued. "We operate together. Throwing someone in at the last minute disrupts cohesion." "She's been here for a month," Kane finally said, "and her numbers are solid." Brennan turned to him. "You're defending this?" "I'm reading the data," Kane replied evenly. "If she can make those shots, we need her making them." Brennan opened his mouth to argue, but Commander Sterling appeared in the doorway. His presence was like cold water on the conversation. "Gentlemen," he said, "I expect professional conduct during this exercise. Whatever personal feelings exist, they stay here. On the field, we're one unit. Am I clear?" "Yes, sir," came the chorus of responses. Sterling left, and the room remained silent. The message had been delivered, received, and understood. The exercise would proceed as ordered, and personal opinions would be set aside, at least officially. Kira sat in her quarters, running calculations in a notebook. She'd obtained topographical maps of the exercise area and was mapping wind patterns, elevation changes, potential shooting positions. The mathematics filled page after page, variables and constants, formulas she'd learned so long ago they were second nature now. She didn't need 3 weeks to prepare. She'd been preparing her entire life for this. But 3 weeks would give her time to ensure that when the moment came, there would be no room for doubt, no space for dismissal. Just the impossible shot that would silence every question. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. She was 6 years old, sitting on the porch of their house in Texas. Her father was cleaning his rifle, the same ritual she performed now, and she was watching with intense concentration. "Daddy," she'd asked, "why do you clean it so much? It's already clean." He'd smiled at her, patient and kind. "Because, princess, your equipment is your life. You take care of it, it takes care of you. Someday you'll understand that the difference between life and death can be a speck of dust in the wrong place." She'd nodded solemnly, not fully understanding, but trusting his wisdom, absolutely. Will you teach me everything? She'd asked. Everything you know? He'd set down his cleaning rod and looked at her with an expression she only understood years later. Pride mixed with something else. Determination, maybe. Or hope. Everything I can, he'd said, for as long as I can. And then you'll take what I taught you and make it your own. You'll be better than me, baby girl. I know you will. 3 weeks later, she'd watched him deploy. 6 months after that, 2 soldiers in dress uniforms had knocked on their door. She'd known what it meant before her mother opened it, had known from the expression on their faces that her father was never coming home. Everything he'd taught her, every lesson, every patient explanation, every correction and encouragement, it had all been compressed into those 6 short years. And she'd spent the 19 years since trying to prove worthy of the foundation he'd built. Kira closed her notebook and looked at the photograph on her locker shelf. Her father smiled out at her across the years, forever young, forever proud. Tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow we start showing them what you taught me. The morning arrived with heavy clouds rolling in from the Pacific, the kind of weather that made long-range shooting exponentially more difficult. Kira stood on the ridge overlooking the exercise area, watching the wind push the clouds across the sky in irregular patterns. Perfect conditions for failure, she thought, or perfect conditions to prove something that couldn't be ignored. Torres arrived in a tactical vehicle, her expression all business as she climbed out and surveyed the terrain. "Corporal," she said, walking up beside Kira, "weather's not cooperating." "No, ma'am," Kira replied. Torres pulled out a rangefinder and began taking measurements. "Your primary position is here on this ridge," she said. "Secondary fallback is 200 meters east. Targets will be marked by smoke at ranges between 800 and 1,200 meters. You'll have observers calling wind and movement, but ultimately the shots are yours." "Understood," Kira said, already calculating sight lines and potential obstacles. Torres turned to face her directly. "I'm going to be honest with you, Corporal. Division is watching this closely. Commander Sterling stuck his neck out getting you this position. Brennan's filed complaints. There are people who want to see you fail." Kira met her eyes steadily. "What do you want to see, Gunnery Sergeant?" Torres allowed herself a small smile. "I want to see if you're as good as your scores suggest," she said. "Because if you are, you'll change some minds today. And if you're not, it's going to make things harder for everyone who comes after you." The weight of that responsibility settled on Kira's shoulders, but it wasn't unfamiliar. She'd carried it since her father died, since she decided to follow in his footsteps despite everyone telling her it was impossible. The team assembled at the Operations Center, a temporary structure erected for exercise command and control. Brennan ran through the tactical plan, his voice clipped and professional. Assault elements would move on targets at designated times, coordinated with Kira's fire support. Kane would be her spotter, feeding her information on wind and target movement. Cross and Hoffman were assigned to the assault team, their faces showing barely concealed satisfaction at being in direct action roles, while Kira sat alone on a ridge. Brennan gave them their briefing with detail and care, then turned to Kira almost as an afterthought. "Corporal, you'll receive target coordinates via radio," he said. "Take your shots when you have them. Try not to miss." The casual dismissal in his tone was clear, but Kira simply nodded. "Yes, Staff Sergeant," she said. Kane gathered his spotting equipment and fell in beside Kira as they moved to their position. The climb to the ridge was steep, and they moved in silence, conserving energy. When they reached the top, Kane began setting up his scope, while Kira prepared her rifle. The familiar ritual calmed her, focused her mind. Stock adjustment, scope check, magazine insertion, chamber check. Every movement practiced 1,000 times, burned into muscle memory until thought and action were inseparable. "You ready for this?" Kane asked, his tone neutral. "Yes, Chief," Kira replied, checking her equipment with methodical precision. Kane studied her for a moment. "Brennan wants you to fail," he said bluntly. So does half the team. Kira adjusted her scope, her movements calm and practiced. I know, she said. Does that bother you? Kane asked. Kira settled into her shooting position, getting comfortable behind her rifle. My father told me something once, she said. He said the target doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't care if people believe in you or doubt you. It just sits there, waiting. All that matters is whether you can hit it. Kane nodded slowly. Smart man, your father. He was, Kira said quietly, and pressed her eye to the scope. The radio crackled to life. All elements, this is command. Exercise begins in 5 minutes. Sniper team, confirm position. Kane keyed his radio. Sniper team set, primary position, standing by. Kira scanned the terrain through her scope, identifying the marked target areas. 800 meters to the first position, 950 to the second, 1100 to the third. The wind was gusting irregularly, pushing clouds across the valley and creating swirling patterns that would make consistent shooting nearly impossible. Exercise hot, Brennan's voice came through the radio. Assault team moving to objective Alpha. Through her scope, Kira watched the assault element advance across the valley below. They moved with practiced efficiency, covering ground quickly. Then the first target indicator appeared, orange smoke marking a position at 800 meters. Sniper team, you have target Alpha, Brennan said. Engage when ready. Kane pressed his eye to his spotting scope. Wind left to right, gusting at 12 knots, he reported. Target stationary, your call. Kira's breathing slowed, her body settling into absolute stillness. She calculated wind drift, elevation difference, air density in the heavy weather. The mathematics happened automatically now, decades of training reducing complex physics to instinct. She squeezed the trigger with gentle pressure, and the rifle barked. Through the scope, she watched the round impact center mass on the target, 6 inches from the smoke marker. Hit, Kane called. Center mass confirmed. Confirmed, Brennan said, and there was surprise in his voice despite his attempt to hide it. The assault team continued moving, and more targets appeared. 900 meters, then 950, each one requiring adjustment for the changing wind, different elevations. Kira fired, adjusted, fired again. Each shot found its mark. Cross's voice came through the radio. Is she actually hitting these? Confirmed hits, Kane replied. All targets engaged successfully. In the operations center, Commander Sterling stood beside Torres, watching the exercise unfold on monitors fed by overhead drones. Every shot Kira took was being recorded. Every hit or miss documented for the division observers who would determine the unit's readiness rating. She's good, Torres said quietly. She's better than good, Sterling replied, watching another target marker disappear as Kira's round found home. On the ridge, Kira maintained her rhythm. Breathe, calculate, fire, observe. Each shot was a conversation between her and the target, everything else falling away. The wind shifted and she adjusted. The light changed as clouds moved and she compensated. This was what her father had trained her for, what every hour on the range had prepared her to do. Then Brennan's voice cut through the radio with an edge of tension. Sniper team, new target at 1150 meters. Priority engagement. This is your long shot, Corporal. Kira shifted her scope to the new position, and her heart rate stayed steady even as she registered the difficulty. 1150 meters in gusting wind with changing light conditions. The kind of shot that tested the limits of equipment and shooter alike. The kind of shot that would either silence doubt or confirm it. The target sat in a valley depression, partially obscured by the shifting weather. Through her scope, Kira studied it with absolute focus. She watched the wind indicators, the way grass bent and recovered, the movement of dust and debris that told stories about air currents invisible to the naked eye. Kane pressed his eye to the spotting scope, running calculations on his datapad. Winds all over the place, he said, gusting between 10 and 15 knots, direction changing every 30 seconds. You got maybe a 20-second window when it stabilizes. Kira adjusted her position slightly, feeling the ground beneath her, the way the ridge channeled wind in unpredictable patterns. She'd made shots like this before, in competitions her father had entered her in when she was barely old enough to carry the rifle. But never with this much riding on it. Never with an entire team's respect hanging in the balance. "Sniper team, what's your status?" Brennan's voice carried impatience. "Assessing conditions," Kane replied. "Stand by." In the operations center, Sterling watched the overhead feed showing Kira's position on the ridge. The division observers stood behind him, their expressions neutral but their clipboards active, documenting every moment. This shot would define the exercise, would determine whether their unit received high readiness marks or was relegated to extended training status. "She's taking her time," one of the observers commented. "It's a difficult shot," Torres replied. "Rushing it guarantees failure." On the ridge, Kira closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out everything except the feel of the wind on her face, the sound it made moving through the valley below. Her father had taught her this, to trust her body's ability to read conditions that instruments could only approximate. "The wind is alive, princess," he'd said. "Learn to listen to it." She opened her eyes and settled deeper into her position. The wind gusted hard, then died slightly, then gusted again. But there, in the pattern, she found a rhythm. 3 seconds of strong wind from the left, 2 seconds of relative calm, then the cycle repeated. She watched through her scope, confirming the pattern twice, 3 times. "Winds settling into a pattern," she said to Kane. "I'm taking the shot on the next calm cycle." Kane checked his instruments. "You sure? The readings are still showing high variance." "I'm sure," Kira said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. Brennan's voice crackled through the radio again. "Sniper team, we need that target engaged. Assault element is exposed, waiting for your fire support." "Copy that," Kane replied. "Shooter is ready." Kira waited, watching the grass bend, watching the dust swirl. The wind gusted hard and she let it pass. Then the calm came, that brief moment when nature held its breath. She squeezed the trigger with the same gentle pressure she'd learned 20 years ago, the same motion that had become as natural as breathing. The rifle's report echoed across the valley, and time seemed to slow as the round traveled downrange. 1,150 meters was a long conversation between bullet and distance. Long enough for doubt to creep in, for second-guessing to take root. But Kira felt none of that. She knew, with the certainty that came from perfect execution, that the shot was true. "Hit," Kane called, his voice rising slightly with surprise. "Direct, center mass." There was a beat of silence on the radio, too long, too telling. "Confirmed," Brennan finally said. "Good shot." In the operations center, one of the division observers let out a low whistle. "That was exceptional," he said to Sterling. "Environmental conditions alone made that a 5% probability shot." Sterling allowed himself a small smile. "Corporal Ashford is full of surprises," he said. The exercise continued, and Kira engaged 6 more targets over the next 2 hours. Each shot successful, despite deteriorating weather conditions. The clouds had dropped lower, visibility decreasing, wind becoming more erratic, conditions that would have forced most shooters to call off operations entirely. Cross's voice came through the radio as the assault team secured their final objective. "I'll be damned," he said. "She's hitting everything." Hoffman's response was quieter, harder to make out. "Maybe we underestimated her." On the ridge, Kira maintained her focus, but she'd heard the exchange. Kane had heard it too, and he glanced at her with something approaching respect. "You're making believers out of them," he said. Kira adjusted her scope for the next target. "That's all any of us can do," she replied, chambering another round. The final phase of the exercise involved moving targets. Mechanical systems designed to simulate enemy personnel repositioning under fire. Standard protocol called for a 30% hit rate on moving targets at extreme range. Anything above 50% was considered exceptional. "Sniper team, Multiple mobile targets entering engagement zone, Brennan called. Engage at discretion. Kira tracked the first target through her scope, calculating speed and trajectory. The mathematics were more complex now, requiring her to predict not just where the target was, but where it would be when the bullet arrived after 2.5 seconds of flight time. She led the target, accounting for its speed and the wind drift, and fired. Hit, Kane called. Over the next 15 minutes, she engaged 12 moving targets. 11 found their mark. The single miss came when the wind gusted unexpectedly just as she fired, pushing the round 6 inches wide. Still close enough to be recorded as a near miss, but Kira felt it like a personal failure. Outstanding performance, Torres said through the radio, her voice carrying genuine admiration. Exercise complete. All teams returned to base. The assault element cheered, their voices carrying across the radio. Brennan was silent, and Kira imagined she could hear the gears turning in his mind, recalculating assumptions he'd held for weeks. Kane began packing up his spotting equipment. That was something special, he said. I've been doing this for 15 years, worked with shooters from every branch. What you just did in these conditions, that's world class. Kira disassembled her rifle with the same careful attention she always showed. Thank you, Chief, she said. They made their way down from the ridge as rain finally began to fall, light at first, then heavier. By the time they reached the operations center, the valley was obscured by sheets of gray water, and Kira's uniform was soaked through. Torres met them at the entrance, a rare smile on her face. Division observers want to see you, she said to Kira. Commander Sterling, too. This is going to be interesting. Kira followed Torres inside, water dripping from her gear, her rifle case slung over her shoulder. In the main room, the assault team had gathered, and they fell silent as she entered. Brennan stood near the back, his expression unreadable. Cross and Hoffman looked at their boots, suddenly fascinated by the concrete floor. Only Calloway met her eyes, and he nodded with genuine respect. Commander Sterling stood at the front of the operations center with 2 division observers flanking him, their uniforms crisp despite the weather outside. The room had cleared except for the core team, all waiting to hear the assessment that would determine their unit's future operational status. Gentlemen, Sterling began, then corrected himself with a glance at Kira, and Corporal Ashford. The division observers have completed their evaluation. Captain Andrea Sullivan, the senior observer, stepped forward. Her silver hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes carried the weight of 3 decades in naval special operations. She looked to be in her early 50s, but her bearing suggested someone who'd seen more than most people twice her age. I'll be direct, Sullivan said. This unit's performance today exceeded expectations in every measurable category. Coordination was excellent. Assault elements executed flawlessly. Support operations were textbook. She paused, letting the compliments settle before continuing. However, what elevated this from a passing grade to an exceptional rating was the sniper performance. Sullivan turned to face Kira directly, and something flickered in her expression. Recognition, maybe, or memory. Corporal Ashford, your hit rate today was 92% across all targets, including moving and extreme range engagements in weather conditions that should have reduced effectiveness by at least 40%. The room was silent. Brennan's jaw worked as he processed the numbers. Kane nodded slowly, having witnessed every shot himself. Calloway allowed himself a slight smile. The 1150-meter shot, Sullivan continued, has been reviewed by our technical team. Given wind variance, elevation differential, and target profile, our computers calculated a 7% probability of success. You made it look routine. Kira stood at attention, her face carefully neutral. Thank you, ma'am, she said. Sullivan's expression shifted, became more personal. There's something else, Corporal. Something not in the official report. She glanced at Sterling, who nodded permission to continue. Your father was Master Sergeant Donovan Ashford, Army Rangers. It wasn't a question, but Kira answered anyway. Yes, ma'am. Operation Enduring Freedom, 2006. I was a lieutenant then, forward observer attached to a ranger unit. We got pinned down in a valley, 12 of us, enemy positions on 3 sides. Sullivan's voice grew quieter, the professional veneer cracking slightly. Your father made a shot that day, 1,180 meters, took out the machine gun nest that had us trapped, saved 17 of us. Kira felt something catch in her chest but maintained her composure. I didn't know about that mission, ma'am. He wouldn't have told you, Sullivan said. That's who he was. But afterward, when we got back to base, I asked him about the shot, how he calculated it, how he knew he could make it. And he told me something I've never forgotten. The room was absolutely still, everyone listening now. He said, Sullivan continued, that he wasn't the best shot in the world. He said his daughter was going to be better than him, that he was training someone who would make shots he could only dream about. She paused. I see now he was right. Kira's carefully maintained control wavered for just a moment, emotion breaking through. Thank you for telling me that, ma'am, she said, her voice slightly rougher. Sullivan nodded, then returned to her official bearing. Commander Sterling, your unit receives high readiness status. You're cleared for deployment consideration on future operations. She glanced at her notes. I'm also recommending that Corporal Ashford be evaluated for Advanced Marksmanship Instructor Certification. Skills of this caliber should be shared with the broader community. Sterling nodded, allowing himself a broader smile now. Excellent news, Captain. Thank you. As the observers departed, the tension in the room shifted. Brennan stood near the wall, his arms crossed, his expression conflicted. The data was undeniable now, the performance recorded and verified. Everything he'd assumed about Kira had been proven wrong in the most public way possible. Corporal Ashford, Sterling said, you're dismissed. Excellent work today. Kira saluted and left the operations center, stepping back into the rain. Behind her, she heard Sterling begin speaking to the team, but his words were lost to the sound of water drumming on metal roofing. She walked across the compound toward her quarters, her rifle case protected under her jacket, rain soaking through her uniform. Halfway there, footsteps splashed behind her. She turned to find Calloway jogging to catch up. Hey, he called, hold up. Kira stopped, waiting as he reached her, rain running down both their faces. That was incredible, he said. I mean, I knew you were good from watching you train, but today, that was different. Kira replied, the same line she'd given Kane before. Calloway shook his head. No, it was more than that. That 1150 shot, Kane said you called the wind pattern when his instruments were showing chaos. How'd you know? Kira considered the question, remembering her father's lessons in the Texas hills. Learning to read nature's rhythms before she could read books. Experience, she said finally, lots of practice. Your father, Calloway said. He taught you all this. Kira nodded. From the time I was 6 until he deployed for the last time. Every weekend, every summer, every spare moment. He said if I was going to do this, I needed to be better than good. I needed to be undeniable. Well, Calloway said, you're definitely that now. They stood in the rain for a moment longer before Calloway spoke again. Brennan's struggling with this, he said. His whole worldview just got challenged. Give him time. Kira looked toward the operations center, where lights still burned. I don't need his approval, she said. I just need to do my job. Fair enough, Calloway said. But for what it's worth, you changed some minds today, mine included. I thought I knew what elite shooting looked like. You showed me I didn't. After Calloway left, Kira continued to her quarters, stripped off her wet uniform, and sat on her bunk in the quiet. The adrenaline from the exercise was fading, leaving behind the familiar hollow feeling that followed vindication. She'd proven herself, silenced the doubters, demonstrated capabilities that couldn't be dismissed. But she knew from experience that one performance, however exceptional, wouldn't erase weeks of skepticism and dismissal. Trust built slowly in teams like this. She'd just taken the first real step. The question was whether Brennan and the others would let that step lead somewhere, or whether they'd find new reasons to maintain their distance. That evening, the team gathered in the common area for the traditional post-exercise debrief. These sessions were usually relaxed affairs, operators sharing stories and critiquing their own performance with the honesty that came from mutual respect. Kira almost didn't go, but Kane had specifically asked her to attend. When she entered, conversation didn't stop entirely, but it shifted. Hoffman glanced at her and nodded. Cross actually made space at one of the tables. Brennan sat in his usual corner, nursing coffee and reviewing notes. But his posture was different. Less defensive, maybe, or just recalculating. "All right," Kane said, calling the room to attention. "Let's talk about today. What worked, what didn't, what we need to improve." The debrief proceeded normally, each element discussing their performance. The assault team had executed well with only minor timing issues. Communications had been solid throughout. Support coordination had been seamless. Then Kane turned to Kira. "Corporal," he said, "talk us through your process. How did you maintain that hit rate in those conditions?" Kira stood, feeling every eye in the room on her. She'd never been comfortable with public speaking, preferred to let her work speak for itself. But technical discussion was different. That was just sharing information. "I mapped wind patterns before engaging," she said, "found the rhythm in what looked like chaos. Each target required individual calculation based on real-time conditions, not preset data." "The 1150 shot," Hoffman asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Kane said you called it when the instruments showed it was impossible." Kira nodded. "Instruments measure averages," she said, "but wind moves in patterns. If you can find the pattern, you can find the window. My father taught me to trust what I felt as much as what I measured." "Your father was a ranger," Kane said. "He trained you for this." "Since I was 6, Kira confirmed. He believed that excellence required dedication that started early and never stopped. Every weekend on the range, every summer studying ballistics. By the time I was 12, I was competing in national championships." Brennan looked up from his notes, something shifting in his expression. "National championships?" he asked. "3 gold medals," Kira said quietly. "Junior division precision rifle. Then 2 more in the open division before I enlisted." The room absorbed this information. Cross exchanged glances with Hoffman. Kane nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place for him. This wasn't someone who'd gotten lucky today. This was someone who'd been training for this moment for 2 decades. Brennan set down his coffee and stood, walking to the front of the room where Kira stood. The entire team watched, the confrontation that had been building since her arrival finally coming to its resolution. Brennan stood before her, and the silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. His face was unreadable, years of operational discipline masking whatever internal struggle was happening behind his eyes. Then he spoke, and his voice carried clearly through the room. "Kira," he said, using her first name for the first time, "I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on nothing but prejudice. I dismissed your capabilities without giving you a fair chance to demonstrate them. That was wrong." Kira met his gaze steadily. She'd imagined this moment in various forms over the past weeks, had rehearsed responses in her mind. But now that it was here, she found the anger she'd expected to feel was absent, replaced by something closer to understanding. "Thank you, Staff Sergeant," she said simply. Brennan continued, seeming to need to say more. "I've been in the teams for a long time. I've seen what I thought was the standard, and I let that standard become a limitation instead of a baseline. What you did today challenged everything I thought I knew about what was possible in those conditions." Kane spoke from his seat near the back. "She made the rest of us look like we were playing checkers while she was playing chess," he said. "Different level entirely." Cross cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "I said some things," he began, then stopped and started again. "I said some things that were out of line. About how you got here, about special programs. That was ignorant. I'm sorry." Hoffman nodded in agreement. We all were, he added. You earned this. We just didn't want to see it. Kira looked around the room at faces that had shown her nothing but skepticism and dismissal for weeks. Calloway smiled encouragingly. Kane raised his coffee cup in salute. Even Brennan's expression had softened into something approaching respect. I appreciate the apologies, Kira said, but I didn't do this to prove you wrong. I did it because this team needed someone who could make those shots, and I knew I could make them. That's all. That's not all, though, Brennan said. You could have made me look like a fool today. Could have complained to Sterling about being excluded from the planning, about the way the team treated you. You didn't. You just showed up and performed. That says something about your character. Kira thought about her father, about the lessons he'd taught her that went beyond shooting. Honor isn't about being right, Princess, he'd said. It's about doing right, even when no one's watching. Even when you'd be justified in doing less. My father taught me that excellence is its own reward, Kira said. That respect earned through performance is worth more than respect demanded through complaint. I trusted that if I did my job well enough, the rest would follow. Smart man, Kane said, echoing his earlier assessment. The debrief continued for another hour, the atmosphere transformed. For the first time since her arrival, Kira felt like part of the team rather than an outsider being tolerated. The conversation flowed naturally, technical discussions mixed with jokes, plans for future training sessions that now included her input. When the session finally broke up, Kira walked back to her quarters under a sky that had cleared, stars visible through breaks in the clouds. Inside, she pulled out the photograph of her father and sat on her bunk, studying his young face. We did it, Dad, she whispered. They see it now. But even as relief washed over her, she knew this was just the beginning. She'd proven she could make the shots. Now came the harder part, maintaining that standard, building on it, becoming the operator her father had believed she could be. 3 days later, Commander Sterling called another emergency all-hands meeting. The speed of the summons suggested something significant, and the team assembled quickly, their recent success still fresh in their minds. Kira entered to find the atmosphere charged with anticipation. Brennan stood near the front, his posture alert. Kane was already reviewing something on a tablet. Even Cross and Hoffman seemed more focused than usual. Sterling stood at the front, and beside him was Captain Sullivan. Her presence was unexpected, and it elevated the importance of whatever announcement was coming. Settle in, Sterling said. We've received new intelligence that changes our training priorities. Division wants to test our capabilities against a simulation they're calling Apex Protocol. It's designed to represent worst-case scenario conditions, the kind of operation where everything that can go wrong does. The team leaned forward, interest evident on every face. These large-scale exercises were where reputations were built, where operators proved their worth under conditions that approached actual combat. Brennan, you'll be running tactical command again, Sterling continued. But this one's different. The scenario involves extreme, long-range precision. We're talking distances beyond anything we've trained for. How extreme? Kane asked. 1,500 meters, Sterling said, and the room went quiet. 1,500 meters with multiple obstacles, wind speeds up to 30 knots, moving observation patterns, and target windows measured in seconds, not minutes. Kira felt her pulse quicken. 1,500 meters was beyond what most military snipers ever attempted in field conditions. It was the realm of specialized competition shooting and theoretical exercises. In combat conditions with high wind and limited time, it approached the impossible. Captain Sullivan specifically requested our unit for this test, Sterling continued. She wants to see if the performance from last week was exceptional luck or repeatable capability. She's bringing technical observers, recording equipment, and enough brass to make this politically significant. When? Kane asked. Tomorrow, Sterling said. 0600, same range complex. This isn't optional, and this isn't just about unit ratings anymore. Sullivan stepped forward, her expression serious. "If you can demonstrate consistent capability at this level," she said, "we're looking at mission assignments that haven't been available to conventional SEAL units. We're talking Tier 1 operational consideration." The weight of that statement settled over the team. Tier 1 meant the highest level of special operations, missions that stayed classified for decades after completion, work that defined careers and sometimes changed strategic outcomes. Brennan stood. "What do you need from us, sir?" Sterling looked directly at Kira. "I need our sniper to tell me honestly if this is achievable," he said. "Corporal Ashford, can you make a 1,500-meter shot in 30-knot winds with limited target windows?" Every eye in the room turned to Kira. This was the moment that would define not just her place on the team, but potentially the trajectory of her entire career. She could hedge, could say she'd try her best, could cover herself with qualifications and maybes. That's what caution would dictate. But caution had never been her father's way. He'd taught her that confidence without arrogance meant knowing exactly what you were capable of and stating it clearly. She thought about the shots she'd made in competition, the conditions she trained in, the calculations she could run in her sleep. Every lesson, every calculation, every patient correction, all building to this moment. "Yes, sir," she said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "I can make that shot." Sterling studied her for a long moment. "You understand what's riding on this?" he asked. "If you miss, if you fail, it reflects on this entire unit. It affects every operation we might be considered for going forward." "I understand, sir," Kira replied, "and I'm telling you I can make the shot. Not that I'll try, not that I hope to, I can make it." Brennan spoke up, and there was something different in his voice now. Respect, maybe, or trust. "Sir, I'd like to work with Corporal Ashford on preparation. Kane, too. We should run through environmental calculations, verify equipment, make sure every variable is accounted for." Sterling nodded. "Do it. I want our best effort tomorrow." Dismissed. The team filed out, but Brennan caught Kira's arm gently. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said quietly. "Do you really have that kind of confidence?" Kira met his eyes. "Staff Sergeant, I've been shooting since before I could write my own name. My father started teaching me when most kids were learning to ride bikes. By the time I was 14, I was making shots at 1,200 meters in competition conditions. 1,500 is at the edge of my capability, but it's not beyond it." Brennan studied her, then nodded slowly. "All right, let's make sure you have everything you need to prove that." They spent the rest of the day in preparation that bordered on obsessive. Kane reviewed every technical specification of Kira's rifle, checking tolerances and confirming zero. Callaway helped gather meteorological data, studying wind patterns and historical weather conditions for the range area. Brennan worked with Kira on calculation tables for 1,500-meter engagements, running scenarios and backup plans. As evening approached, Kira found herself alone on the range one final time. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. She set up a target at 1,200 meters, as far as the range allowed, and worked through a series of shots. Each one required absolute focus, perfect technique. The distance was unforgiving of even the smallest error. She fired 10 rounds, and 8 found their mark. The 2 misses bothered her more than they should have, but she understood why. Tomorrow there would be no room for error. Tomorrow, everything she'd worked for, everything her father had taught her, would be tested at a level she'd never faced before. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. She was 6 years old, the night before her father deployed for the last time. He'd tucked her into bed, and she'd been crying, not wanting him to go. "I have to go away for a while, Princess," he'd said gently, "but I want you to promise me something." "Don't go, Daddy," she'd sobbed. He'd held her close, and she could still feel the strength of his arms, the steadiness of his heartbeat. "When you're older," he'd said, "someone will ask you to do something that scares you, something that seems impossible. When that happens, I need you to know that impossible is just a word people use before someone proves them wrong. You'll be that someone. Promise me you'll try." "I promise, Daddy," she'd whispered. He'd kissed her forehead. "That's my girl. Now get some sleep. I'll see you soon." But he never came home. And she'd spent 19 years keeping that promise, pushing herself to be better, stronger, more capable. Tomorrow, she would find out if it had been enough. Kira packed up her equipment as darkness fell, secured her rifle, and walked back to her quarters. Inside, she sat on her bunk and pulled out the photograph one more time. Her father smiled at her across the years, forever young, forever believing in her. "Tomorrow, Dad," she whispered, "for both of us. I'll make the shot, I promise." She set the photo back on the shelf and lay down, trying to sleep. But her mind kept running calculations, kept seeing the trajectory of a bullet traveling 1,500 meters through wind and weather, kept hearing her father's voice, patient and steady. "Impossible is just a word, Princess, just a word." The morning arrived with clouds so low they seemed to brush the ridgeline. Kira stood at her position, watching gray curtains of rain sweep across the valley in waves. 30-knot winds, the meteorological report had said, gusting to 35. Conditions that would make even 1,200 meters nearly impossible. 1,500 was madness. Kane set up his spotting scope beside her, his movements precise despite the weather trying to tear the equipment from his hands. "Visibility's going to come and go," he said. "We might only get seconds when the target's clear. Then we'll make those seconds count," Kira replied. Below them, the operations center buzzed with activity. Flag officers had arrived overnight, observing remotely via satellite feed. Technical teams had positioned cameras at every angle. Sullivan stood beside Sterling, both of them wearing expressions that suggested they understood exactly how much was riding on the next few hours. The protocol called for 3 shots at escalating distances: 1,500 meters, 1,650 meters, and 1,750 meters. Each target would appear for exactly 30 seconds. 3 opportunities. 3 shots that would either validate everything Kira had claimed or expose it as hubris. Brennan's voice came through the radio, and there was no dismissal in it now, just professional respect and underlying tension. "Sniper team, first target will appear in 5 minutes. Conditions are deteriorating. You have authority to wave off if conditions become unsafe." "Negative," Kira said. "We're committed." Kane glanced at her. "You sure about this? We could postpone." Kira settled deeper into her position, feeling the ground beneath her, the wind pushing against her body. "My father never got to finish his mission," she said quietly. "I'm finishing mine." Kane nodded, understanding. "Then let's do this right." The radio crackled. "First target active, 1,500 meters, 30 seconds. Through the rain and shifting clouds, the target appeared, a silhouette barely visible in the gray murk. Kira pressed her eye to the scope, and the world narrowed to wind, distance, and mathematics. "Wind gusting 32 knots, Kane reported. "Left to right, variable. Target obscured. 15 seconds. Kira closed her eyes, shutting out the scope. Felt the wind on her face. Found the pattern in the chaos, just like her father had taught her. Just like she'd done 1,000 times before. 10 seconds. She opened her eyes. The target cleared for a moment. The wind dropped slightly. 2 seconds of opportunity. She fired. The rifle spoke, and the round began its journey across impossible distance. 3 full seconds of flight time through wind that wanted to push it off course, through air density that wanted to slow it down, through chaos that wanted to prove it couldn't be done. In the operations center, nobody breathed. "Hit," Kane called, his voice tight with disbelief. "Center mass. Perfect." The operations center erupted. Flag officers leaned back in their chairs. Sullivan closed her eyes briefly. Sterling allowed himself a smile. Brennan's voice came through, steady now. "Outstanding shot. Prepare for target 2. Kira didn't celebrate, didn't acknowledge the success, just reloaded, reset, waited. 1,650 meters. The distance her father had never attempted. The distance that lived at the edge of equipment capability and human skill. Second target active, Brennan announced. 30 seconds. This time the wind was worse. Gusting erratically, no clear pattern. The target appeared and disappeared behind sheets of rain. Kane called numbers that kept changing, his voice betraying frustration with conditions that defied prediction. 20 seconds. Kira's hands began to shake. For the first time since arriving at this base, doubt crept in. The distance was too far, the conditions too chaotic. This wasn't possible. 15 seconds. Then she heard it. Her father's voice, clear as if he was lying beside her on this ridge. When you're older, someone will ask you to do something that scares you. You'll be that someone. 10 seconds. The shaking stopped. Her breathing steadied. The fear dissolved into focus so intense it bordered on transcendence. 5 seconds. The wind shifted. Pattern emerged from chaos. The target cleared. She fired. 3.5 seconds of flight time. The longest conversation between bullet and distance she'd ever attempted. Hit, Kane whispered. Dead center. How did you? He stopped himself. Some questions didn't have answers that made sense. In the operations center, one of the flag officers stood. That's impossible, he said. Sullivan turned to him. No, sir, that's excellence. Prepare for final target, Brennan said. 1,750 meters. This is the one nobody's ever made. Kira broke position briefly, stretched her fingers, looked at Kane. Whatever happens, she said, thank you for believing. Kane met her eyes. I'm not thanking you yet. Make this shot first. Kira settled back into position. 1,750 meters. Beyond the theoretical maximum effective range of her rifle. Beyond what physics suggested was possible. But her father had taught her that possible was just mathematics, and mathematics could be solved. Final target active, Brennan announced. 30 seconds. The wind hit 40 knots, sustained. The target was barely visible, a ghost in the storm. Kane's instruments showed nothing but chaos. 25 seconds. This is insane, Kane said. I can't give you good data. The wind is... I know, Kira said. Trust me. 20 seconds. She closed her eyes completely, shut out the scope. The instruments, the voices on the radio, became nothing but sensation. Wind on her face, rain on her skin, the living, breathing chaos of nature that her father had taught her to read like a language. 15 seconds. The pattern was there, buried deep in the chaos. 3 beats of hard wind, 1 beat of calm. Repeat. She felt it rather than calculated it. 10 seconds. Open your eyes, Kane said urgently. You're running out of time. Not yet, Kira whispered. 5 seconds. Now she opened them, saw what she'd felt. The pattern matched reality. The calm came. 3 seconds left. She fired. 4 full seconds of flight time. In the operations center, Sterling gripped the edge of his desk. Sullivan's hand was over her mouth. Brennan stood frozen, watching the monitor. Kane pressed his eye to the spotting scope, tracking the round's impossible arc through wind that should have pushed it wide by feet, through distance that should have robbed it of all killing power. Hit, he said, his voice breaking. Perfect center. 3 for 3. She just did the impossible. The operations center exploded. Flag officers on their feet, technical observers staring at their instruments in disbelief. Sullivan openly crying, hands shaking as she tried to write notes. Brennan keyed his radio, and his voice was rough. Corporal Ashford, return to base. Outstanding performance doesn't begin to cover what you just accomplished. Kira stood slowly, her legs unsteady after hours of tension. Kane was staring at her like she just walked on water. Your father, he said. He taught you that? Kira looked out at the valley where 3 targets bore the marks of her impossible shots. No, she said quietly. He taught me to believe it was possible. The rest I had to figure out myself. They descended the ridge in silence. When they reached the operations center, the entire team was waiting outside. As Kira approached, they formed up and saluted. Every one of them, even Brennan. She returned the salute, confused. "What you just did," Brennan said, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "That wasn't just good shooting. That was history. That was proving what's possible when skill meets dedication, meets absolute refusal to accept limitations." He paused. "That was honoring your father's legacy in a way that makes us all better for having witnessed it." The team remained at attention until Kira dropped her salute. Then Calloway started clapping. Others joined. Within seconds, the entire compound was applauding. Inside the operations center, Sullivan waited with Sterling. When Kira entered, Sullivan stood and extended her hand. "Your father was right," Sullivan said. "You are better than he ever was, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." She handed Kira a folder. Inside were orders. CIA Special Activities Division. JSOC Tier 1 consideration. 3 different elite units requesting her transfer. "These are yours if you want them," Sullivan said. "You've earned the right to choose." Kira looked at the orders. Everything her father had been offered and turned down. Everything she'd worked toward for 19 years. The apex of military achievement. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Sterling looked surprised. "You want to think about turning down Tier 1 operations?" Kira glanced out the window at the team gathered outside, saw Brennan talking with Kane, both of them animated, saw Cross and Hoffman, their earlier mockery replaced by genuine respect, saw Calloway, who'd believed in her before it was easy. "I need to see something first," she said. Sullivan nodded. "Take your time. Those offers won't expire." That evening, Kira sat in Sterling's office, her father's full personnel file spread before her on the desk. Sterling had given her access to everything. The classified sections, the records that explained 19 years of questions. Offer 1, Delta Force Selection, 2003. Declined. Reason, family considerations. Offer 2, CIA Special Activities Recruitment, 2004. Declined. Reason, primary mission stateside. Offer 3, JSOC Sniper Instructor Position, 2005. Declined. Reason, daughter's training incomplete. Offer 4, Tier 1 Unit Transfer, 2006. Declined. Reason, legacy preparation paramount. The list continued. 6 different offers between 2003 and 2007. Every single one declined. Every single reason connected to her. The final entry was dated 3 weeks before his death. Request training duty extension. Reason, subject's daughter, age 6, demonstrates exceptional capability beyond projected development curve. Primary mission, ensuring foundation complete before deployment obligations. Legacy preparation paramount. Request assignment, Fort Benning Ranger Training Battalion, Sniper Instructor Position. He'd requested it. They'd approved it. He'd been scheduled to start the week after he returned from Afghanistan. But he never returned. Kira read the words through tears she couldn't stop. Her father had given up everything. 6 different opportunities to join the most elite units in the military. All sacrificed so he could stay close to her, could complete her training, could ensure she had the foundation to succeed. He'd chosen her, every single time. Now she had to decide what to do with that choice. She found Brennan in the common area, reviewing training schedules. He looked up as she entered. "Staff Sergeant," she said, "I need to talk to you about something." 2 weeks later, Commander Sterling stood before the assembled unit with an announcement that surprised no one who'd been paying attention. "Division has approved a new training program," Sterling said. "Advanced marksmanship and tactical shooting. It'll be open to personnel from multiple SEAL teams and eventually to other special operations units." He paused, looking directly at Kira. "Corporal Ashford has agreed to lead the program. She'll be promoted to sergeant and will serve as chief instructor. The program begins next month. The team applauded. Kane grinned. Calloway whistled. Even Brennan smiled. Afterwards, Sullivan found Kira on the range, where she was testing curriculum for the new program. "You turned down Tier 1, Sullivan said. "Your father's dream. Why?" Kira looked out at the targets, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. "He didn't dream of me joining Tier 1, she said. "He dreamed of me becoming someone who could pass on what he taught me, someone who could multiply excellence instead of just demonstrating it." Sullivan was quiet for a moment. "He turned down 6 offers to stay with you. And I'm turning down 3 offers to stay with them," Kira said, gesturing toward the team. "He taught me that the most important mission isn't always the most glamorous one." She paused. "I can do more good here, training the next generation, than I could ever do on some classified operation nobody will ever hear about." Sullivan nodded slowly. "Your father would be proud. Not of the shots, though those were historic, but of this choice." She handed Kira a small box. "This came for you, from General Thornton." Inside was her father's rifle, the actual rifle he'd carried in Afghanistan, the rifle that had made the 1,180-meter shot that saved Sullivan's life. It was worn, the stock showing years of use, the metal carrying the patina of hard service. A note was attached. "Kira, your father asked me to hold this until you were ready. He said, when she makes the shot I couldn't make, when she chooses teaching over glory, she'll understand. You made that shot. You made that choice. This is yours now. Not to use, it belongs in history, but to remember what excellence with purpose looks like. The offer stands when you're ready. But something tells me you're exactly where you need to be." Bull. Kira held the rifle gently, reverently. It was heavier than hers, larger. She could see where his hands had gripped the stock, where his cheek had pressed against the rest during countless shots. She set it carefully in a display case she'd prepared in the training room. Beside it, she placed the photograph of her father and her at age 3. 2 legacies, side by side. 6 months later, the Advanced Marksmanship program was running at full capacity. 30 students from 5 different SEAL teams. The waiting list was 6 months long. Kira walked the firing line, watching her students work through drills she'd designed. Gavin Cross made a 1,100-meter shot, his technique transformed. Reed Hoffman called wind patterns like he'd been doing it his whole life. Even Brennan, who'd insisted on going through the course despite his rank, was shooting better than he had in years. "Sergeant Ashford," a voice called from the observation area. Kira turned to see a young woman, maybe 23, standing with her gear bag. Fresh from sniper school, the nervousness evident in her rigid posture. "Sergeant Ashford?" "I'm Corporal Sarah Mitchell. I'm here for the advanced program." She hesitated. "I heard you made the Apex protocol shots. I heard—" She stopped, unsure. "You heard what?" Kira asked gently. "That you're the best there is," Sarah said quietly. Kira thought about her father, about Sullivan, about every person who'd helped her along the way, about Brennan's apology and Kane's respect, and the team that had become family. "I'm not the best there is," Kira said, "but I can teach you what the best taught me." "What's your name again?" "Sarah Mitchell, ma'am. My father was—" "Army?" Kira guessed. "Ranger? Sniper?" Sarah's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Because that's usually how this works," Kira said with a small smile. "Come on, let's see what you can do." She led Sarah to the range, positioned her behind a rifle, and began teaching the same way her father had taught her. Patient, precise, building foundations that would last a lifetime. As the afternoon wore on, Kira glanced over at the display case. Her father's rifle and photograph caught the light coming through the windows. She could almost hear his voice, patient and steady. "That's my girl. Now teach them what I taught you. Excellence shared is excellence multiplied." That evening, Kane found Kira in her office, reviewing student progress reports. "You got a minute?" he asked. Always, Chief. What's up? Kane held up a tablet. Division wants to expand the program. Make it mandatory for all SEAL sniper candidates. They want you to write the new curriculum. Kira looked at the tablet, at the opportunity being offered. Me? Write the official curriculum? You're the one who made shots nobody thought possible, Kane said. You're the one who figured out how to teach it. Makes sense you'd write how everyone else should learn it. Kira thought about her father's lesson plans, the notebooks he'd kept, the progression he'd designed for her training. She'd kept all of it, studied it, built on it. I'll do it, she said, but I want to call it something specific. Kane raised an eyebrow. What? The Ashford method, Kira said. After my father, everything I'm teaching came from him. He deserves the recognition. Kane smiled. I think that's perfect. I'll tell Division. After he left, Kira pulled out her father's old training notebooks, opened them to the first page, where he'd written in his careful hand, For Kira, when you're ready, teach others what I taught you. That's how excellence becomes legacy. That's how we never die. Love always, Dad. She ran her fingers over the words, feeling the indentations where his pen had pressed into the paper. Then she opened her laptop and began writing. The Ashford Method, a comprehensive approach to long-range precision marksmanship. Introduction. This curriculum is built on the foundation laid by Master Sergeant Donovan Ashford, United States Army Rangers, Medal of Honor recipient. His approach emphasized not just technical skill, but the development of intuition, patience, and absolute commitment to excellence. These principles, passed down and refined, now form the basis for training the next generation of precision marksmen. She wrote through the night, translating her father's lessons into words that others could understand and apply. Every drill, every progression, every technique, all of it traced back to those 6 years in the Texas hills when a ranger taught his daughter that impossible was just a word. As dawn broke over the Pacific, Kira saved the document and sent it to Division. Then she walked to the range, to the place where she'd proven herself, where she'd honored her father's legacy in the only way that truly mattered. She wasn't in Tier 1 conducting classified missions nobody would ever hear about. She was here, teaching excellence to multiply itself through generations of shooters who would carry her father's wisdom into a future he'd never see. And as she watched the California sun rise over the ocean, Kira Ashford finally understood what her father had known all along. The shot no one believed possible wasn't the one at 1,750 meters. It was the one that would echo through decades of students she'd never meet, carrying forward lessons from a ranger who died too young, taught by a daughter who refused to let his legacy end. That was the shot that mattered. That was the legacy worth building. That was the promise, finally kept.